Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of She Lights the Way, where every week we dive into the journeys of unsung women who are doing pretty incredible things and lighting the way for all of us. I'm your host, Nicole Huseman. I had the sincere pleasure of sitting down with Jen Wike Huger, content strategist, editor, consultant, and community builder in the world of open source software.
Coming into Red Hat and into tech, I was new to it. I didn't study it. I didn't come to it with a technical expertise. So when I came to it with a marketing, editing, community, people person, there were times when I felt out of place. There were times when I felt not good enough because I didn't know the technical. But what I learned is the right people don't care about that. And the right people, meaning the people that are really good to work with and to care what they think, are the people who understand, I have the technical chops. You have all this other stuff that, hard skills, soft skills kind of thing. We make this thing beautiful together. I couldn't do it alone and you couldn't do it alone. And that's what makes this thing go.
Jen Wike Huger spent a decade at Red Hat, one of the iconic leaders in open source projects and communities. She was part of the magic behind opensource.com, which not so long ago was the go-to resource for unbiased, thoughtful perspectives about all things open source. Its topics were as diverse as its contributors. In our conversation, Jen and I talk about collaborating with intent, leading with purpose, and finding joy in our world, particularly relevant as we think about our global pandemic and the shift to remote work. Let's get started. Jen, it is so wonderful to have you on She Lights the Way. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great talking to you.
Can you talk about where you are today and what your world looks like as we speak?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've had some time to reflect on that. I'm at the intersection of community and digital marketing. And it's an interesting time, right? Because tech is sort of in this flux, which it always is. But I'm feeling hopeful in 2024. I think pandemic was rough. Last year was rough. But I'm feeling and I'm hearing and I'm getting vibes that tech is maybe in a healthier place. There's been so much for diversity. There's been so much for remote work, which we know has helped a lot of women specifically participate more equally in the tech world. And I feel like, at least personally, I'm at a good time for getting in touch with my creative side and trying to find out how to bring that forth in this environment of tech, which can be very meeting heavy, Slack heavy. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Which is a lot, but
it's, I think, great to have the opportunity to reflect on where we are in our careers and all of what we've done, and then what we want to do moving forward. Before we get there, can you talk a little bit about how you got to where you are now and your journey through the tech world?
Well, we know that most careers are not a straight line, and mine is no different. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Communications with a concentration on public relations and a minor in Spanish. So I studied abroad. I lived in New York for a little while. I eventually came back home to my home state of North Carolina, and I live in Raleigh. And so I was doing some freelance editing, and I was also considering a career in medicine. I went back to school. I got all of the prereqs to go to nursing school and start there with the ultimate goal to be a physician's assistant. And I, which I feel like if there's any writers listening to this podcast, they might identify. I started writing again. I started freelance writing, and I just got back into that. It's a love of mine for my entire life. I've loved writing and expressing myself through words. And so I switched again and I went back to editing and writing. And so I eventually got a part-time editing role on opensource.com at Red Hat when it was a very young, just a couple years in publication, and quickly got transitions to full-time. They were at a great spot, a lot of momentum for growing, but they needed to grow out of their current set of processes, which were very basic and understandably so. They were just getting this thing going. And Jeff and Jason were amazing at, getting this thing up and running, proposing this idea, getting it approved, having the CEO, Jim Whitehurst, on their side. But it needed the next level of go. And so I came in, and I am a process structure person. Those are a couple of my strong suits. And so I, moved us from pen and paper to Trello. I moved us from, sort of having a process for how content gets moved through the pipeline and published to having like, this is how we do it. And, we made adjustments, of course, all the time, which is another thing that I really want to focus on in my conversation with you today is collaboration. Red Hat was really big into collaboration. It was one of the, lines in their ethos. It was talked about all the time. It was promoted all the time. The managers like lived and breathed it. And when I left Red Hat and I started working as a head of marketing for these seed stage startups, I realized it was my turn to bring this to the table because it's hard. I think it can be hard when it isn't pushed every day by management, and it can be hard with remote work. So we're virtual. How do we collaborate? How do we have creativity and the conversations that we need to have in the way that we need to have them over video? I think it's more natural in person. You have body language, you just have this sense of camaraderie. I think one thing for managers, tech companies, everyone to be aware of in this new wave of remote work is collaboration cannot be ignored or put on the second tier. It's critical for people feeling loyal to the company, loyal to the project, at, as though they can get good work done with their team. And you can't just assume that everyone is going to figure it out. You've got to give people some guidelines, some structure there, and just some motivation to really bring that to the table. Because I think the other thing too is that when you don't do that, things can flip towards silos. Going all the way back, that was where the magic was with opensource.com and at Red Hat, and specifically on our team. And I know other teams had this too, but we moved the needle. We went from publishing 1 article a day to 3 articles a day to, from a handful of writers to thousands of writers. And granted, this was over the course of several years, but our numbers were up and to the right. And that was because we had this collaboration. We would review everything we were doing. We would get feedback. We would adjust. We were data driven, but we were also talking and having fun and being creative and working with people. So did that for 10 years. And then eventually, decided to broaden my horizons, do some new things, and did the head of marketing role for a seed stage startup. And that was really good for me. I feel like I learned a lot from that. And there was a lot of, just kind of that entrepreneurial spirit, bootstrapping, lean startup kind of vibes that I loved.
I'd love to explore more this emphasis on collaboration because I too think that is so important, especially when you're working hybrid or remote. Can you dive into some of the specifics about what worked, in that magical team
Yeah.
for opensource.com?
Not exciting, but just so true is have an agenda. You would not be surprised how many times people say, "Oh, we know what we're going to talk about. We know what this meeting is about. We know what we're going to do." But the magic that really Jason and Jeff were adamant about, I remember, they always had this process and they taught me this process and I took this forward with me and we all made it mandatory is have an agenda and have a light, at least, understanding, especially if you're working with community, but even if it was our internal team of who is leading this meeting, who is contributing to this meeting, and who might just be listening in. Everybody knows their role. Everybody knows other people's roles. And so it's not even just about time management, which it does help with that, but it's about having the right conversation for this moment and getting something out of it that moves you forward. That's what I loved about working on that team. And I want to bring into my next role is we were always moving things forward. It always felt like forward momentum. And if we felt stuck, we investigated that and we talked about it with each other. So then when we moved remote, pandemic happened, we didn't go back to the office. We implemented some things to help us do this remotely, on a video and you're not together. I think if you can have your agenda set, your role set, your agenda like written out a little bit more, so a little bit more about what does this agenda line mean? What are we trying to do here? What's the goal here? What are some notes that Jen already has here? Having people look at the agenda early. I know that people, especially that have back-to-back meetings, they're moving fast. It's hard for them to want to do this. But having people, not just have the agenda, but you need to look at the agenda before the meeting. We would also have a Monday meeting for the team that was like around the horn is what we called it. What's happening this week? From a HR perspective, from a business perspective, from, a team schedule perspective. And then what's everybody working on? Does that make sense to everyone? Anybody have questions? Anybody have needs from other folks? Does anybody have news that they want to share? And then we would do a little quote of the day so that it was kind of like a fun little, team building kind of, and we would do that every Monday and everybody looked forward to it to kind of set the pace for the week. And then we also had one-on-ones, of course, with our manager, and we followed the same rules, which I've seen one-on-ones be pretty terrible because they don't have an agenda. The person who's talking with their manager doesn't know what to expect. I've even seen a manager like have this sense of almost like burden and pressure because they are leading this meeting, but there's no agenda and they're not, they just came out of a meeting. They're just trying to do the right thing and have a one-on-one with you. And the collaboration isn't there. It's nice, but what are you really honestly doing too to get something out of this to move the business forward? I think you're honestly doing your team a disservice when you aren't also moving the business goals forward, the projects forward, the programs forward, addressing people's real daily needs. I would say another thing is allowing people to have further conversations off the call, which is where this host comes in. We would always have Matt is running the meeting, Jen is running the meeting, and you're in charge of, okay, guys, great. Take that offline after the call. It's not like a reprimand thing, but it's like this meeting, we have to keep it on track. And we would call it, we would call it rabbit hole. And then we would have like a safe word, like jellyfish.
That's great.
Right. This conversation matters because I think that's the other thing. All conversations matter. When you make somebody feel like what they need to talk about is irrelevant or not important, that's not good either, right? You want to make everybody needs to say what they need to say. But to have, a culling of that and then the right time and the right place.
That's great. So, one of the things that I heard through what you said that's really resonating with me is being intentional.
Mhm.
And I think you can take that into, right? How does it manifest in our personal lives and in our professional lives?
It's very intentional. You're not just having the one-on-one because HR says you need one-on-ones with your people. It's not just having the weekly meeting to have it. And when we saw management change at Red Hat, that changed. It depends on the intentionality of the person in charge. So I totally agree. There's so much intention that can only come from paying attention, in a special way that infuses the ideas, the checklist, the guidelines with momentum and fuel and result.
We all have, challenges or difficult situations that we face. Can you talk a little bit about some of the
Yeah.
challenges along the way?
Yeah. So, coming into Red Hat and into tech, I was new to it. I didn't study it. I didn't come to it with a technical expertise. So when I came to it with a marketing, editing, community, people person, there were times when I felt out of place. There were times when I felt not good enough because I didn't know the technical. But what I learned is the right people don't care about that. And the right people, meaning the people that are really good to work with and to care what they think, are the people who understand, I have the technical chops. You have all this other stuff that, hard skills, soft skills kind of thing. We make this thing beautiful together. I couldn't do it alone and you couldn't do it alone. And that's what makes this thing go. And, because I think in tech, there are gatekeepers and there are people who want to feel better about themselves because they have the technical chops and you don't. So that creeps in, right? You see that on the periphery or you see that happen to someone and you sort of, get a little bit like fear. Is my self-worth or my, worth in this career going to be lessened because I don't have that? And of course, I learned a lot of technical, I learned Linux and all of that over time. So that was definitely a challenge for me. It's funny, I don't like to really call it imposter syndrome because I feel like it's a little different, but it touches on that. And I just, always want to say to all the people who feel that way, you can't be all things and you shouldn't be all things. You should be you and you should bring your skills and talents, even if you could learn the technical stuff, which of course you could. You don't want to, and that's okay. I don't want to. I love what I love. And that's even where I am now, where after 15 years of doing this, I have a ton of skills. Okay, what are the things I actually don't want to bring to the table? Because that's not really where I'm getting joy.
Right. Right.
Joy, I think,
Uh,
is my big word for 2024.
yeah. Mine as well. I think, we talked a little earlier about kind of being at a point where we're, you know, reevaluating or at least, hey, where do we want to go next? Right.
Yeah.
And I'm learning that, you know, I'm not a coder, right? And that's actually okay because I bring these other skill sets like you, journalism background, right? And
Yeah.
the ability to, I think I've always been at the intersection of humanity and
Mhm.
technology
Yeah.
and being able to
And we
bring
need
those
that.
skills. Yes,
We
absolutely,
need
right?
that.
Yeah,
We don't want
yeah,
people who have that talent to say, "Oh, well, that's not good enough." Because we
right.
need that, especially now with AI getting big. We need people who are our people and our humanity people to be our barometers, give us their insights, give us their thoughts, stay on that side of things while also understanding technology. Cause I think that you just hit on something else that like I had to figure out, which is just because I don't want to be a coder doesn't mean I don't understand code.
Right. Right.
I understand code. I understand what it does. I understand the technology of the products that I am helping market and sell. Doesn't mean I have to be the one creating the product. And so I think there's a gate right there that has, some people still like to keep. Well, if you can't write the script, then, you're not really, you don't really get it. And I understand that to a degree. My husband is a software engineer, and I understand that to a degree in terms of he's explained some things to me that I'm like, wow, with that better technical understanding, I will do a better job at this job. So I think it's important, still on the humanities side, on the creative side, on the marketing side to, of course, deeply understand as much as you can the product and the technical stuff, but it doesn't mean you have to be that. And so, this is part of the reason why I did learn Linux and I did take a couple coding classes and, studied it to a degree because I do think that's important still. And I think that's where maybe some of the gatekeeper's fear is, just to try to understand both sides.
Right. Right. And, what I've also found is that there are very few folks who understand both sides or can seek to
Yeah.
understand enough the technical side such that it can be communicated why that's important to
Yeah.
everyone else. Jen, of all of your experiences, what do you think has been, are you either the proudest of or has been the most rewarding?
Yeah. I've had so many great experiences, honestly, and worked with so many fantastic people. I would say at Red Hat and on the opensource.com team, it was creating this editorial process that is still used today. Well, I should take that back. It's not still used today because opensource.com was closed earlier this year and transported over to opensource.net with the open source initiative, which is wonderful that they've taken it over. So they are, of course, not using the same process that I had in place, but it was used up until the end. And so that there's a lot of pride for me there that worked for so well for so long for, a group of people. Um, that was a revolving door. There were different new people that would come in and use it and it would work for them. So that feels good. And then the community side there, talking with hundreds of writers every month and nurturing them and finding out about their walks of life. I mean, we had writers with all different backgrounds from all over the world, some English speaking, some not. And it was just a really neat experience to meet so many people in that way. And then over the past couple years, I've worked with some really great people, Mike Purcell, Nathaniel McCullum, and Nick Vidal is over at the Open Source Initiative right now. And he was the community manager and he reported to me at Profian. And we just had the best time. And he's still out there being awesome. And, it's just one of those relationships where it's just, marketing and community comes together. And when they really get each other, you can create some really great content that really connects to the audience, which was opensource.com was all about, which is ingrained in me, which is, solve a problem that the user has, bottom line. And if you're not doing that, then you're not really helping. And if you're not really helping, what are you doing? So we got that, we understood that, and that was awesome. And then I worked with the DevRel at AppMap, the last place I was, and he got that too.
So for you, what's next? What are you thinking about in this next year? What seems most exciting to you?
I've been, just really enjoying my life, which makes me think, I'm like, do we work to live or do we live to work? What are we doing here? And, just really going into this new year with that intentionality to find the next thing for me that is a balance of work life. And I know people say that all the time and it's prevalent, which is great. We want that to be prevalent, but you also don't want to whitewash things with it. I think it's easy to check boxes and say that this is work life balance when it's actually not. And I think the barometer is joy. Am I getting, where am I on joy? It doesn't have to all come from work, of course, and it doesn't have to all come from home, of course. So just overall, I've been, what brings me joy? How much of it in a week do I need to feel like I'm living a good life? It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not gonna be perfect, right? There's gonna be some weeks that are less and more, and hopefully things even out over time.
Yeah. You're just such energy and positive light. And I can't wait to
Here.
see, where you go with this and what you do next. And yeah, the whole work life thing. Absolutely. It resonates with me what you said, right? It goes up, it goes down. But
Yeah.
as long as you're happy in what it is you're doing, it ebbs and flows, right? And,
It does. And
absolutely.
that, to your point earlier, like that collaboration and intentionality, if you're able to bring that to your job, I feel like it does add a lot to the joy barometer. If you can find that, create that, I think that's a big sort of what I'm looking for in the next as well. And, having your support. Thank you so much for supporting me and talking with me and thinking of me, and supporting other people out there. It's so nice to hear other people's stories and, just feel supported.
Oh, well, Jen, it has been an absolute pleasure. And so let's end with this one. What does she likes the way you
I was describing to my husband, I was like, I'm going to be on this podcast and it's about this. It's just what, I've loved to do in my career, which I just think is hugely valuable, which is sharing other people's stories. I like how the focus is, what have you done to light the way? And what do you recommend to light the way? And how does listening to this light your way as a listener? That's what it means to me.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you so much for being here. I have had so much fun.
Yes, this was great. I would love to come back, and I hope that,
Yes, please do.
I can't wait to listen.
Absolutely. Yes. And we will continue this conversation on another episode. So there you go. And can't wait to see what you do in 2024.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It was great talking to you.
Thanks so much for listening to my conversation with Jen Wike Huger, content strategist, editor, community builder, and consultant. You can learn more about Jen and her work, check out her new consulting business, and connect with her at her website, jen.io. Thinking about our conversation, I'd love to hear what resonated most with you and how you can apply these insights to benefit you and those around you by taking even the smallest steps